Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be in Shillong, and I think I speak on behalf of Devdutt as well. Is this your first visit to this part of the world?
Yes, it is. It is.
Okay. So Devdutt was he was a bit skeptical about whether anybody had read his books here, but right down the path from the hotel to the venue, so many youngsters came and took photographs with him. And to use his term, it was an espresso of ego for his writerly self. So thank you for that. So the session is called Myths and Us, but we are kind of bifurcating it into two halves. One is about how Devdutt became so synonymous with mythology, and the other half is about his new book, which is on marriage. So let's first start at the beginning. So, what brought you, a medicine man, into the world of mythology?
Um, so just before I answer this question, you must know that this is the first offline lit fest after COVID.
This is, yes.
Yeah,
So
this
hats off
is
to
at least for
Mary and her
me.
side.
So I'm posting this on Instagram. Suddenly it struck me that, oh my God, I'm going to talk on open air, not through those horrible screens on Zoom. So thank you, Mary, and thank you, Malvika, for making this happen. Um, as far as mythology is concerned, it was a hobby for me, where I went for all my answers. So I would read Ramayana, Mahabharata, Amar Chitra Katha as a child, and I went deeper as it was just a hobby. I never thought it would become so big. It was something that I did in my free time, and over time, I realized that there was so much knowledge here, so much deeper understanding of human psychology, human society, culture, art, heritage, and it just sort of gradually became a part of my life. I mean, I would write columns, I would write an occasional column here and there where I married management and mythology, and I realized they became very popular. I mean, a column which was supposed to run for 2 or 3 weeks ran for about 15 years. So it just happened organically. I never realized it would be so, people would be so interested in the subject. I thought I'd do my pharma work to earn money and I'll do mythology for fun. Now I do mythology for money too.
That's great. So there's a public perception that Devdutt is. In fact, you just showed me a little screenshot of somebody who's called you a Hindu mythologist. But I have to say this about Devdutt, that he actually is vastly well informed about mythology from all over the world. He has written books on Greek. You've written books on the Greek mythological traditions. I'm sure, are familiar with other traditions of myths across the world. So, what about Indian mythology do you think makes it? Do you think it is more complex than, say, Scandinavian, the epics there, or Greek myth?
Um, see. Mythology is the traditional stories of a culture through which the culture expresses itself. In fact, there's a Khasi story about myths, really, storytelling. It says that God gave wisdom to this man in writing, and on the way home, he lost the piece of paper. And so when people ask where is the knowledge of the gods, because you don't have a paper, he said, I have printed it in my mind and I will reveal it through stories. And that's how storytelling began in the world. Storytelling began to reveal the wisdom. And every culture has beautiful stories. It's just that I'm Indian, my market is Indian, and Indians are not interested in non-Indian stories. So I
That's
focus.
sad.
Yeah, we would like to talk about Egyptian mythology and Assyrian mythology, but when I would give lectures on Egyptian mythology or Assyrian, I would have only 5 people in the audience. But if I would talk on Rama and Mahabharata, I would have 50, 500 people in the audience. So the difference was huge. So uh, we are wanting to know more about our culture. So I wouldn't say it's more complex. It's just that it's a very diverse tradition. We have stories at a level which is fabulous. I have the memories of people who lived 2000 years ago through stories. It is not so in other parts of the world. China, for example, consciously wiped out its mythological tradition and is now trying to reclaim it, but much of it is lost completely. Japan has a lot of tradition. Africa has stories which are oral and are lost again because, colonization took place, slavery took place. The stories are, people are trying to, but we have been very lucky. We have oral stories, written stories in every language. So I think you can spend a lifetime decoding our culture, and I think that's what I have done. I've tried to make it accessible to people uh, as far as possible. I try to simplify it. I don't try to make it sound larger than life. Um, and it's not religious stories, right? They're stories about life. It's about uh, suffering, about pain, about loneliness, about how this deals with day-to-day life. My mythology is used in management because I keep saying that modern management as we know it today uh, is really based on Western mythology, on heroism, on leadership. The leadership concept is really strongly rooted in the Bible, on the idea of Moses and Noah. Uh, Indian Jain mythology, for example, has a very different way of looking at business. Buddhist mythology has a very different way of looking at business. Hindu mythology looks at money in a very different way. So the world is not realizing that there are multiple ways of looking at economics, at politics. We are so colonized in a way that we don't realize there are different ways to imagine life. And that's what mythology, reveals to us. So it's not just India, around the world.
And around India as well, we were just sitting and listening to the beautiful poetry session here, and one of the poets mentioned a bit of local folklore about this mother who eats her child after it has been killed by the father. So
Yeah.
you're learning it as well as you go along, because each part of the country has its own
Yeah.
traditions.
So these stories about the horror of cannibalism, of how I was hearing the story because I had vaguely familiar with the story from this part of India about this woman who marries a man hoping that her daughter, it's a remarriage, that the daughter will get a father, but the father is jealous of the stepdaughter and he kills the child and feeds it to the mother. It's very macabre, the story. And in horror, she weeps and she leaps off this waterfall. And that story, when you read, you remember Greek myths talk about fathers who sacrifice their children and feed the gods the body of their children. And these motifs, like for example, a motif which is found in a Khasi story is found in Greek mythology. And I find these patterns very exciting. These patterns, because every day you realize they're human patterns. How do the same patterns exist in different parts of the world? Because they come from the deepest, darkest pits of humanity. And I think that's what connects us with the world. So that's what I want to share with the world. Like today I heard this young man telling the story and I was like, oh my God, that sounds so much like a Greek myth about this, the story of Tantalus, really, of who kills his own son and offers it to the gods. And the word tantalizing comes from this man because he's punished by the gods that he'll always be in water. He'll be thirsty, but if he tries to go towards the water will recede from him. And if he's hungry, he reaches out to the fruits above, and the fruits will pull away from him. So he's tantalized always, and is all forever hungry and forever thirsty. And that story, and then I was hearing this Khasi story of this mother suffering and eating her child because she didn't know it was it. Then the connections of heartbreak, of desire, all that is wrapped in these mythological stories. They're very raw. They're not literary. They are raw, they are elemental. And I think that's the best part of mythology.
So you spoke about patterns which form across cultures. So you've been writing for 20 years now. So do you see the patterns of reactions to your stories, the responses? An author today is more than an author on the page. He has a social media life. So do you see the way people react to your stories, the need to define you in certain ways? Has it changed in the last 2 decades?
So initially people assumed I'm right wing. Then they said I'm left wing. Then they said you are a fence sitter. Then they said you are out of the box thinker. And I realized that people want to box you because they're insecure and they need, you don't like a shapeshifter. You don't like people, you want people to be predictable so that a predictable person helps you understand yourself better. An unpredictable person will make you very uncomfortable because you don't know how to deal with them. It's like every day, if you step out of your house and there's a tree, and one day it's a jamun tree, and the other day it's a mango tree, and the third day it is full of thorns, and the fourth day it's full of butterflies, it's very exhilarating but also confusing. Because you want the tree to be, no, you be a tree that I can deal with, so that I know the pattern and therefore I can deal with you. And that's what I see with readers. They want writers to, at least when I'm writing on mythology, people would assume that you write on Hindu mythology. And then I would write on Jain mythology something. They say, Acha, aap Jain bhi jante ho? And then I'll say, ha, but then I remember in the Bombay local train, I was telling my story, a friend of mine, a story from the Gospels. And the gentleman next to me said, are you a parish priest? And I'm like, okay, if you, so no. And recently during the Ramzan, month of Ramzan, every day I would tell a story from Islamic traditions. And people said, oh, you are one of those people. So you find all these strange and funny people around the world because they want to fix you and they box you. But I prefer being a shapeshifter. I challenging you to think in different ways because mythology is vast, mythology is diverse, and I want people to be educated. And education means to be curious, which means to always say that I don't know everything. In fact, the word mythology means somebody's truth. It doesn't mean everybody's truth, it means somebody's truth. And as long as you're curious to find out somebody's truth, you will explore their mythology.
So in Shillong terms, Devdutt is a pine wood one day, cherry blossom tree the other day, and a poinsettia plant the other day. So yes, you are a shapeshifter, and I think all writers should be that.
It's fun. You know, it's sometimes I hear people being seen as, you know, when they write only romance novels, and I hear them in LitFest, we talk, and they say, you know, I want to write a horror story, I want to write, but I can't because my publisher doesn't want to publish that, and my readers want to only now see this, and you get boxed into that, and you're not allowed to be creative. Luckily for me with mythology, I've never called myself Indian mythologist. I said I'm a mythologist. And I want to write on Norse mythology, I want to write on Chinese mythology, Japanese mythology. And luckily, my editors, my publishers have given me the freedom. And they've given me the freedom because I've also worked hard to ensure that it's economically viable. So I understand business a bit. And therefore, at the right time,
You learned it from the myths.
yes, and you know, the moment the Chinese president is arriving to India, I will make sure that all the articles in the newspapers are about Chinese mythology. And because right now everybody's afraid of China, so I said, if you're afraid of China, know the Chinese story. You know how the Great Wall of China is now replaced by the Great Firewall of China. And why do Chinese love to build walls? So, you know, I was invited by the Chinese students to talk to them. And I said, okay, you want to conquer the world? And they said, yes. And I said, which language will you speak in a conquered world? Chinese or English? And the room didn't have an answer. I said, you're a country where... so it was very interesting because they started thinking. And I said, you know, let me tell you about another mythology from India where stories change depending on which king you're talking to which king. So in the Jain mythology, you will have Ram who doesn't kill Ravan, and you have a Hindu mythology where Ram kills Ravan, and both stories coexist. And this is, but which is the right story? I said, does it matter? Can two truths coexist? That's the magic of India. But it's not the magic of China. You have removed it from your culture. And now that we had a conversation, they said, no, we also have such stories. Now there was a conversation because they realized the power of storytelling. And they started telling me stories about China because they were belonging to different parts of China. And they said, you know, I heard this story and I heard that story. And a conversation happened. There was no vivad. There was no argument. There was samvad. And at the end of the evening, they were telling me to eat this and I was telling them to eat this, and we had become friends because I respected their truth and they respected my truth. And we were expanding each other's truth by sharing stories. And I think that's what my aim is, to take people to a place of shared truths.
So you use the word truths, and you know, there is this mythology is infinitely inferable. You can infer any truth out of it that you wish. So do you think sometimes there's the danger of them being, misquoted, misused, and misrepresented? Does that worry you as somebody who works with mythology so closely?
Well, stories are stories, and you can't control what a mother is telling the child. The stories, mythology originates in the parental retelling of stories to children. It doesn't originate in a scripture written 5,000 years ago by a bearded old man. It begins with the parent telling the child a story, because in that storytelling, the child is creating the view of the world. There are good people, there are bad people, there are heroes, villains. The when the mother is saying that the mother-in-law was very bad, the aunt was very bad, she's creating monsters. When the father is talking about the family issues and family politics, how the brother cheated him from the property, he's actually talking the Mahabharata. So this is how the child shapes his viewpoint. There is no true right or wrong in storytelling. It's emotional journeys. The moment somebody says it is right and wrong, you have entered the realm of politics. Now it's about power. Because only politicians seem to know the truth. Nobody else in the world knows the truth. No wise man will ever say, I know the truth. Every wise man will say, I don't know the truth. Politicians are absolutely sure they know the truth. So they're a strange creature, special characters in mythology. But the thing is, this trying to fix a story emerges from human insecurity. We want, tell me this is the truth, tell me this is the truth, because we can't handle, as I said, the shapeshifter. We can't handle a world which is constantly changing. We are seeking certainty. And then Krishna tells, Phal ki chinta mat karo. So in India, you have a God who doesn't give you guarantees. I mean, how do you deal with that? कि युद्ध करते जाओ, guarantee नहीं है. Imagine telling your child that पढ़ाई करते रहो, फल की चिंता नहीं है. The child will stop studying. So you have to frighten the child and tell the child that no, Krishna didn't say that exactly. In my Gita, Krishna said, अगर तुम पढ़ाई करोगे तो फल जरूर मिलेगा. And maybe the फल will be chocolate. So now that is not the truth, because that's not in the Bhagavad Gita, but the mother has to say that, or the child won't study. So you have to manufacture truths to your context. And that happens all the time, not just on the Arnab show.
I think that's his second appearance this evening. The first one was in the last session. So now, the second half of the session, I said, we're going to speak about a specific book of Devdutt's, which is marriage. And Devdutt is very prolific. I was just telling him over lunch, he's like Barbara Cartland. I don't know how many of you know about Barbara Cartland. She was this extremely prolific author. So Devdutt is right up there with Barbara Cartland. Well done.
I have the eyelashes too.
So Devdutt, marriage, at a time when its relevance in social life and modern life is being questioned, why a book on marriage?
So step one, I'm not married, so I can only write about marriage.
Yes.
This was done during COVID times, and when we were
We'll do a formal launch with Mary on stage after the session.
TK. And we wrote this book because I got a request from someone that can you put a book on marriage, because the court cases were happening around marriage, around adultery, around same-sex marriage, about all kinds of conversations were happening around marriage apparently in the Supreme Court. And the lawyers, one very senior lawyer said, we don't have a book, an easily accessible book which talks about marriage in India, because the government keeps saying ye hamare sanskriti ke viruddh hai. And nobody seems to know what this Sanskriti is. So can you please tell us what is this Sanskriti? So and it happened because in the conversation I said, in Rig Veda there are stories about the Apsara, Urvashi leaving a husband in the Rig Veda, the oldest scripture, leaving ki main ja rahi hu swarg, and Pururavaha, husband is saying, mat jao, hamare bachon ka kya hoga? And she says, tum sambhalo. She said, I'm bored of earth. So you have the story in the Rig Veda, which is like, is it proto-divorce? And I was like reading the story, and then there is the story of Lopamudra and Agastya, where she is looking at Agastya and saying, Apna puja path band karo, and please pay me some attention. Do your husbandly duties, gods have got enough attention. Here's a woman demanding attention from her husband within marriage, and it's a interest, and this is a conversation from the Rig Veda. I'm not talking about the Puranic traditions, which are much later. It's a conversation which is over 3,000 years ago. So I was telling these stories and I said there's no one place where these stories have been put together. So I wanted to tell stories from the Vedas, from the Puranas, from folk traditions, oral traditions, region epics, Tamil stories, ballads, Rajput ballads. So I tried to put as many as I could to give a sense of how diverse and dynamic India's marriage traditions are. There is no one type of marriage. And I also, I'm often invited by people to choreograph their weddings because they want, हमको थोड़ा हवन भी चाहिए, लेकिन champagne serve कर सकते हैं क्या हवन में, देवदत्त जी. And I'm like, oh my God, I better charge a lot for this. Because nobody knows what they're doing. It's like this stage performance where everybody's, and now because of Karan Johar, I think every Indian has Sangeet. When my sister got married, we didn't know what is Sangeet. Now Tamilians are doing Sangeet.
Malayalis are doing
Sangeet. It's the end of the world.
It is very nice.
So it's strange things are happening. And I said that now, the Mangal Sutra has reached every corner of the world. All kinds of strange rituals are happening. Henna is being applied everywhere. Alta is being applied everywhere. And the weddings are becoming interesting. But the real fact is, at the end of the day, if you don't have a wedding certificate from the government of India, which is a marriage certificate, you could be in serious trouble. You can have the most expensive wedding in the world with all the choreographers and all the pandits from Banaras. But at the end of the day, you have to register the wedding at court. And really, that's what matters, that parchi. And I thought, that's interesting, right? We have all these traditions in the world, but that's actually performance. If it is not registered, the state of India doesn't consider it a marriage. It has to be registered. And I wanted that to be brought to light, and this parchi, who decides who should marry whom? And marriage is about creating family. And therefore you have, people saying that you can only marry from this community, that community, outdated ideas like that. And then people are now asking, can same-sex couples get married? So all these things were emerging, and I thought, let me write a simple book, not heavy book, just choti-choti kahaniya. Also telling about stories of women who were not married. So there is a whole section of women who choose not to be married. So there is the Tamil stories of Mani Meghalai or stories of Madhavi. These are courtesans who had many husbands. Then there are nuns and men and women who choose not to be married at all. They don't want marriage. There are some who have multiple marriages, some who have one marriage, some who have remarriage, some who have heartbreak, divorce. All kinds of things happen. So the whole diversity is what I wanted to capture for the young generation. Because romance is the bestseller, right? Everybody loves romantic books. But I think young generation should know that there is no fixed formula of marriage. There are happy marriages, there are unhappy marriages. There are multiple marriages, there are singular marriages. There are no marriages, and people are very, very happy in this world without getting married. There are women who have had children without marriage. There are men who have raised children without marriage. And they're all and I'm picking up only stories from the Vedas and the Puranas and the Indian scriptures. They're all part of our Sanskriti, which I think the politicians will get a heart attack because you see, they know the truth. And scholars like me just write myths. But I want to compile these because you have these strange arguments in the court saying, "Hamare Sanskriti ke viruddha hai," and then I'm like, "नहीं आपने पढ़ा नहीं है, आपको संस्कृति के बारे में कुछ नहीं पता है." So somebody has to do it, right? So, and make money while doing that.
So, one of the recurring features in this book is the agency of women.
Yes.
And sometimes it's overt, sometimes it's done at a level of deception, and still the woman triumphs without the man even knowing that he's been had. So I'd like you to read one story about Ravan.
Yes.
Yeah, this is the one, story 21.
Okay. So Mandodari marries Ravana. This comes from the Telugu traditions. So this is a story which is based on the Telugu traditions. And Krishnadevaraya wrote a poetry, a dance on this. So it's a very famous one. So Parvati wanted Shiva to build a home. But Shiva did not understand the concept of a home. She said, "I need a place that keeps me warm in winter." He suggested they go to the crematorium. She said, I need a place that keeps me cold in summer. He suggested they go to the Mount Kailash covered with snow. She said, I need a place that keeps me dry in the rains. He suggested they live in caves. Frustrated, she ordered Shiva to build her a palace. Shiva did not know how. Shiva asked his devotee Ravan to help. Being a Vedic scholar well versed in architecture, he built Shiva a palace. It was beautiful and it made Parvati very happy. Pleased that his wife was pleased, Shiva offered Ravan a gift. And Ravan, greedy as ever, said that he would like the palace itself as a gift. And can your wife be my wife, for I have heard she is very beautiful? Shiva, the one who is without guile, this means Bholenath, said, so be it. He did not understand the concept of marriage. Parvati divined how Ravan was taking advantage of Shiva's innocence. To teach him a lesson, she took a frog, a manduka, and turned the frog into a replica of herself. Ravan saw this duplicate Parvati and took her to Lanka to his new palace. She called herself Mandodari as she was actually a frog. But pompous Ravan never realized he had been tricked by the goddess.
That's wonderful, because I like the story because of the cluelessness of the husband, which is deeply identifiable, and the deception of Parvati. So
And Ravan is clueless too.
Ravan's absolutely.
I removed the vulgar parts of the story, which is that Ravan keeps wondering why Mandodari loves his attention just before the rains.
Fantastic. So, staying with this, today you've written in one of the newspapers about how you've just mentioned how diverse the concept of conjugal life and conjugal bliss is in our scriptures. So you've asked why can't why can't there be same-sex marriage? So what do you think stops that in today's world where uh, things are improving?
I think what stops it is kindness. People aren't kind. We love being cruel because soap operas on television have told us that powerful people are cruel. And we confuse cruelty with power. But kindness is a very difficult thing to experience. To be kind, to be generous, to accept that people are not like you, they don't think like you, they don't feel like you, they function differently, and to be graceful enough to allow them to live their lives on their terms. Now, that requires a lot of courage. Politicians don't have that courage. Judges don't have that courage. Businessmen don't have their courage. Just to be kind, to recognize that people are different. And sab aapke jaise nahi hai. And not everybody wants what you want. You may believe that men marry women because that's your worldview and it's perfectly fine. But there are other worldviews where men are romantically and sexually attracted to men. There are women who are romantically and sexually attracted to women. There are men and women who are asexual. There are all kinds of worlds that exist. ब्रह्मांड में अलग अलग प्रकार के लोग हैं, जीव जंतु हैं. आप में वो ज्ञान नहीं है, बुद्धि नहीं है. You don't have the ability to allow all kinds of things to flourish. And I think that's the problem with the world. We are afraid of kindness, but we are very excited by cruelty. Because I know one thing, when I consult a lot of TV serials, and whenever the ratings go down, they need to do something cruel, and the ratings go up. Because people love cruelty. Saas bhi kabhi bahu thi, which basically means Saas can be as cruel as the bahu, and the bahu can be as cruel as the Saas. And I think that's the sad part of life.
So we have around 10 minutes left. I thought we'll just throw it open because I know a lot of people here would have questions. So if you do have one, do raise your hand. I can see a blue hand. Yes. Can someone? Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, ma'am. Devdutt sir, I've been following you for ages. Similarly, I've been interested in mythology for ages also. My grandmother used to tell me such stories, and since then, I am interested in one specific character, specifically a person, is Ashwathama. And I have been reading a lot about him, also heard a lot of podcasts about him. So what's your thoughts on Ashwathama?
Well, with Ashwathama, I mean, I was just talking about cruelty. With Ashwathama, you experience a man who thinks it's okay to be cruel. Because what does Ashwathama do? He kills Draupadi's children. And he wants to kill an unborn child, a child who has not even been born. He wants to kill the child because he's so full of anger. And I think Ashwathama represents a lot of young men today who are full of rage and anger. And they don't know why they're rage and angry. They're very angry. And I think that anger is embodied in Ashwathama. And it's tragic because he comes from an entitled, educated background. He has wealth, he has power, he has everything that you can wish for. But all the wealth, all the power, all the upbringing has not taken away his cruelty. And that's a very interesting story because the story begins because he's so poor, he doesn't know the difference between milk and water. And that's how the story begins. The father goes on a trip to find food for him and ends up creating a son who is exceptionally cruel. He is the only character that Krishna curses. So Krishna, who is always smiling and laughing, and is the only character who is cursed by Krishna, saying that, how can you be so cruel that to attack an unborn child? And I think that is something we must think about this. And he says to be immortal, and he's still around us. I think it's a metaphor for people with lots of power, lots of privilege, lots of education, but unke andar itna gussa hai, and they don't know why they are angry, but they want to hurt people, especially women, especially unborn children. That's the story. The story is of trying to kill an unborn child. And I think that's something we need to reflect upon.
Can you consider?
Okay, can we just move around the questions a bit because then we'll cover more people. Yes, there's a gentleman standing in the aisle just behind. Yes. Some ladies also, please.
Okay. So, can I ask or you want me to pass?
Yes.
Okay.
You ask first.
Okay. So, Devdutt ji, thank you for solving the problem of politicians, whatever that very myopic view of conjugal life and what is the right kind of conjugal life. I also see a lot of problem among the contemporary politicians and their attitude towards the environment, towards biodiversity. And I think it's high time you write a book on that also, how our myth can be more can offer more friendly advice for biodiversity and the environment and all. Thanks.
Well, it's already written. It's called Aranyaka. It's the book of the forest. I wrote with Amruta Patil. It's been shortlisted for the Greenlit Prize. So if you are interested in mythology of the ecosystem, there is a book called Aranyaka.
Sir, I have a question that how can
Okay,
we...
sir, can we? Okay, just after that, there's a question for the lady in pink in front. Go ahead, sir. Let him first go ahead since he started.
Sir, how can we differentiate between mythology and history? That is, how can we...
So history is based on evidence.
No, sir. That the recent trend that mythology is being converted into history. It is being presented as a part of history.
See, if you want to study history from politicians versus history from historians, problem kidhar hai?
That I know that...
So when you have a heart problem, you'll go to a cardiologist. When you have a kidney problem, you'll go to a nephrologist. But for history, when you go to politicians, फिर तो लफड़ा होने वाला ही
But the
है.
general narrative is that mythology is being presented as a part of history. So how
Okay.
can we separate that, yes, this is a mythology and this is a history? These need not to be merged or converged.
नहीं कर पाओगे. छोड़ दो.
Okay, on that
you.
cheerfully pessimistic note, can we just pass the mic to the lady in front? So there's no hope. You can't stop
Well,
this.
there is, but you know, right now, when people are not interested in Saraswati, why present her to them?
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, ma'am. I have read your work ever since I was a child. And now that I'm a history student and I'm doing my undergrad in history, I must tell you that you are widely debated in my early medieval South Asia course. So I must ask you this question because I firmly believe that when myths attempt to seduce history, perhaps popular imagination is created. So the question I would like to ask you is, which is based on what Romila Thapa ma'am writes in The Tyranny of Labels, about how we must not attempt to apply the present circumstances of today to the past. And since most of your work sort of overlaps with this contemporary context that we live in, how much of your work do you think subverts the popular narrative into believing that perhaps tradition in ancient India was as it seems in your work?
You see, it's a complicated question. We don't have time for that. But the easy answer is please read my books more. Thank you. 199 rupees with discount. But the point is, people want to feel good about their past. Everybody wants to think good about their family, their country. So they go to a historian. A historian can't do that. The historian's job is not to make you feel good about your past. The historian's job is to tell you this is the past. But what is the market wanting? The market says, tell me good things about my past. That's the problem. So let's take an example of a British child. A child raised in Britain wants to hear good things about Britain. The historian will tell the child, your ancestors colonized the world, enslaved the world, plundered the world. That child is not going to like the historian. You see, so historians can't make you love your country. Politicians can. So we must separate the subjects. If you're looking at a historian to feel proud of your country, you are on the wrong path. Mythology is nothing to do with the country. It is telling you what do you believe in, what did your ancestors believe in. It's a different subject. Politicians want your vote. They will tell you anything you want so long as you give the vote. They don't care for the truth. But truth is overrated. You and I don't want the truth. I want to hear good things about my father. I don't want someone to tell me my father was sometimes good, sometimes bad. I want to be told my father is a hero. I want to be told my father was a great man who changed the world. If a journalist comes and tells me that, actually your father was not so good, this is the evidence that he was not so good, he was probably good, he was maybe good, and they have evidence to prove, I will say, get lost. So we all want good memories of our past, and historians can't provide that because that is not their job. We confuse the job of historians. As a mythologist, my job is to tell you what the stories are communicating about hunger, fear. How did people imagine the world? Why did people believe in rebirth? Why did people believe in one God? So my job is that. It is not to make you feel good about yourself. But what people are looking for is they want to feel good about themselves. So either you listen to politicians or have a drink of whiskey.
Which is, I think, a good note to end the session on. So thank you so much, Devdutt. May the stories and the myths all keep coming. And I'd like to invite Mary for a quick launch of the book before we are ushered out. Can you just come and stand with Devdutt and a book? And yes, we'd also like Dr. Vijay to come. Anyone else? And Cyril sir, are you here? Oh, yes. So we need more copies, actually. Yes. Yes. Hi. These are
Hi.
the people who actually reached out to me and got you here. Yes. Will be available for book signings at this time?
The book, hello. The book is available at the Reading Hub bookstore. You can get a copy and get it signed from the author himself. Thank you.